Welcome back to Holiness to the Lord. This time we'll be covering Genesis 7 through 11, and it's the story of Noah. In Genesis 7 verse 2, it talks about how the Lord says to bring on 2 unclean animals of every kind and 7 clean animals of every kind, male and female. I think this is a cool thing for both numbers, where the clean are seen as perfect, and going back to the creation, male and female, and emphasizing that fact. And then if we move on to verse 6, it's interesting that Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. 6 again being the number that is 1 short of 7. So this to me is emphasizing the wickedness of the world at the time when Noah built the ark and the flood came. On to verse 10. They went in 7 days early into the ark. Now there are different places in these chapters that talk about when they went into the ark, and so I'm not sure if this is definitively they went in 7 days and they just chilled there for a week before the rains actually came. But either way, even if they were making preparations 7 days before and actively putting things in, I think it's really interesting to think about how I doubt there were actually rain clouds in the sky. I doubt there was flooding coming. I doubt that there were external symbols that the Lord's will was going to come to pass. Must have taken a lot of faith to act on such a crazy idea to all pile in this ark when there was no sign of danger. Verse 13, maybe there was, maybe they entered in a different time. Anyway, verses 14 to 16, again, I think it's so cool how it's reflective of the language of the creation, with the various kinds of animals and talking about the breath of life and male and female. On to chapter 8, in verses 4 and 5, it skips ahead a little bit to when the ark comes back, and it says the ark rested at a time of the year that includes 2 sevens, and it rested on top of a mountain, which pretty cool, pretty symbolic of, again, mountain of the Lord, rest of the Lord, cool things like that. And the water went away on a time of year that includes 2 tens, 10 again being like a finishing, 10 being a completion. That's the word I'm looking for. In verse 8, the dove found no rest outside of the ark, indicating that inside the ark there was rest, going back to the idea that the ark is symbolic of covenants and of a mobile temple, a mobile rest of the Lord. Just a cool thought. Verse 11, the olive leaf. I think it's really cool that the olive is symbolic of Christ's atonement. The olive press, olive oil is very symbolic of the atonement, and it's cool to see that symbolism already in the book of Genesis. Verse 20, there's an altar, and Noah offered sacrifice. It's cool that Noah and his family were saved through covenants, through following what the Lord said, through this sealed ark. Even though that ark saved them physically, even though the covenant was fulfilled in so many ways, Noah didn't stop offering sacrifices towards the Lord and praying. And I also think this could be one of the reasons why they included extra of the clean animals, because you sacrifice clean animals, and so that way, you don't kill off a species. In chapter 9, we have a second starting again. This is very reminiscent of Adam and Eve, and similar to how Adam and Eve, their own story, showed this duality of a first and a second start, a rebirth. I think it's cool that Noah and his family are again a rebirth, pointing towards this idea of the earth being baptized with water, more or less, and Noah coming back and receiving many of the same instructions and just things starting over. Verse 4 in chapter 9 talks about not eating blood, and I think this is cool because it's not for nourishment. Blood is very symbolic for the life of humans and animals, and so it is used for sacrificing, for cleansing, for sanctifying. It is not used for nourishment in the same way that bread is, and that's another good symbolic food. Verse 9 talks about how covenants are oriented towards the family, how covenants aren't just about the person making the covenants, how it's all about posterity and children. Verse 12, I think, is very, very temple oriented, where it talks about a token of a covenant. So you make a covenant, but to remind yourself of that covenant, it seems silly to repeat the words, because sacred things are sacred things. But if there's a token associated, something that is more common, more everyday, it's something that you can see, something you can think about, and something that will recall your mind to the actual covenant. And I think that's pretty great. In verses 20 through 27, I found this to be really interesting. It wasn't in the current student manual, but it is in the older student manual. And I just wanted to read because this is a very interesting story, but has cool temple connections. In the student manual, it says, Nimrod claimed his kingship on the ground of victory over his enemies. His priesthood, however, he claimed by virtue of possessing the garment of Adam. The Talmud assures us that it was by virtue of owning this garment that Nimrod was able to claim power to rule over the whole earth, and that he sat in a tower while men came and worshipped him. The apocryphal writers, Jewish and Christian, have a good deal to say about the garment. To quote one of them, the garments of skin which God made for Adam and his wife when they went out of the garden, and were given after the death of Adam to Enoch. Hence they passed to Methuselah and then to Noah, from whom Ham stole them as the people were leaving the ark. Ham's grandson Nimrod obtained them from his father Cush. As for the legitimate inheritance of this clothing, a very old fragment recently discovered says that Michael disrobed Enoch in his earthly garments and put on him his angelic clothing, taking him into the presence of God. Incidentally, the story of the stolen garment, as told by rabbis, including the great Eleazar, calls for an entirely different reading of the strange story in Genesis 9 from the version in our King James Bible. They seem to think that the erath of Genesis did not mean nakedness at all, but should be given its primary root meaning of skin covering. Read thus, we are to understand that Ham took the garment from his father while he was sleeping and showed it to his brethren Shem and Japheth, who took a pattern or a copy of it, Salma, or else woven garment like it, Simla, which they put upon their own shoulders, returning the skin garment to their father. Upon awakening, Noah recognized the priesthood of his two sons, but cursed the son who tried to rob him of his garment. Anyway, like I said, really cool, and hearkening back to temple stuff and the garments of Adam and Eve, which is really cool. In chapter 10, verse 2, it's interesting to show that Japheth is listed first as sons, and that Japheth himself has 7 sons. This points to me that the author is emphasizing the goodness of Japheth, how he is favored of God. And then finally in chapter 11, verse 4, something I found interesting was that they talk about building a tower. Why would you build a tower after such a thing as Noah and the flood? Well, if you learned and were taught by your parents and grandparents that the wicked were flooded and killed, if you wanted to continue to be wicked, you would want insurance so that you wouldn't be flooded and killed. Even if that's not literally why the tower was built, I think it's just a testament to man's arrogance and pride to show how much they can do, how great their creations are, when really it's minuscule compared to God's, and we're all God's creations. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and hope to see you next time.